Bibles Guide to Peak Performance. What we're going to cover in this online course, really over 5 sessions, is we're going to start by giving you an introduction of how we go about building peak performance. And this is pretty important so you know what we're going to be doing in this whole course, which really consists of 5 sessions. In the second session, we're going to get into the details. We're going to start scheduling the big training phases. And again, you're going to learn more about that after this session. You're going to know exactly what we're going to do. In session number 3, we're going to start forecasting training volume and intensity across your whole fight plan. In session number 4, we're going to dig into planning individual sub-phases and training weeks across your whole fight plan. And then we're going to finish off by programming individual training sessions. So we're going to cover everything that you need to know in this online course in order to build your own individualized and periodized training plan. So here we are, session 1, the MMA Training Bible's Guide to Building Peak Performance. So let's get into it. And so what we're going to cover first here is we're going to make sure that you're familiar with the worksheets that we're going to use throughout this whole, really it's an interactive workshop. I'm going to work with you step by step to help you build your own individualized plan. I want to make sure you understand also how to develop peak performance in these 4 steps. And those are really the big learning objectives for this session. And this is exactly what we're going to cover in this session. First, as I said, we're going to give you an introduction to the worksheets that we're going to be using, and then I'm going to go into detail about each of these steps that I'm going to take you through in the next few lectures. So the first thing we're going to do after we go through the worksheets, introduce you to them, is I'm going to give you an overview of step 1, which is all about scheduling the big training phases across your fight plan. Then we're going to dig into step 2, which is forecasting training volume and intensity, 2 very important things across your whole fight plan. Then we're going to dig into step 3, which is planning training sub-phases and training weeks. And then I'm going to give you an overview of what we're going to do in step 4, which is all about programming individual training sessions. Okay, so the first thing that you need to do is decide how you want to build your training program with me. Do you want to do it the old-fashioned way with paper and pencil? If so, you need to go to the download center, which should be around the video below it, and you need to download and print off the Fight Plan Template PDF file. So let me show you exactly what it looks like. Here it is right here. So when you open up this PDF, what you're going to see is a couple different segments. There's one big block up here, there's another block right here, and then there's another block down here. So the first thing that you need to know is there's all sorts of relevant information that relate to your fight schedule. Here we're eventually going to want you to identify the location and then the date of your fight if you have it scheduled. If not, then you can estimate. And then we're going to go through matching up this fight plan with the calendar months and then the calendar weeks. And after that, I'm going to move into the next block, which is all about training cycles. This is periodization theory. And first we're going to schedule training phases, and then when we do that, I'm going to teach you how to schedule training volume and intensity across your whole fight plan. Here you can see we're going to draw training volume in blue and then training intensity in red. And then it ranges all the way from 10% all the way up to 100%. And how those changes over the course of the whole fight plan is pretty important. But you'll learn that in this course. We're going to teach you how to schedule the sub-phases right here, and then followed by the training weeks and the training days. We get very, very specific. And what you see down below here, it's the difficulty of training, which is a concept that we'll cover later on. And we schedule training difficulty, which ranges from no training, very low training, low, medium, high, and very high training difficulty on a weekly basis across your fight plan, and of course on a daily basis. And then I'll give you some examples of individual training sessions. Down below here we have performance factors. This includes setting testing dates for the MMA Training Bible's testing battery, which we covered in the Science of MMA course, along with many other concepts here that you need to know: periodization, overtraining, building unstoppable endurance, and then building explosive strength and power. All those things are critical now, so you should have certainly watched that whole course first. But after we schedule the testing dates, then we schedule performance factors and goals for resistance training and endurance training. But you're also going to have goals that change across your fight plan that we don't cover related to your MMA skills. You work with your coach to set these. Mental training, you can look at our goal setting guide to help you here. You might have nutrition goals, especially when it comes to weight cutting, and then you might have other goals here. So what you need to do is, and I recommend that you print off this sheet here. So this is a 2-page document. This is the first page here. The next page is down below. That's the first thing that I want to introduce you to. Let's go back over to the lecture. Now, I also wanted to give you the fight plan template in Excel in case you're more comfortable working with it that way. Obviously, you'll need access to Excel to work with it. Now, I'll be using Excel throughout this course because I have a lot of experience using it, and I think it's a better online teaching tool for this sort of thing. But I am really going to recommend that you go with the paper and pencil method just for simplicity. This way, you'll be able to follow along with me as I go through all of the workshops. So what we're looking at here in the Excel document, might as well orient to it, but it looks like exactly the same as what we've already looked at in the PDF. Here's the fight schedule information as we've talked about. Here are all the training cycles that I introduced you to. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so you can see the whole document. And then we have performance factors. And again, the nice thing about Excel is that I can scroll over here pretty far, and you can see that we can accommodate many different fight plan lengths in here: 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, and 12 months. So this is the template that I'm going to be using, and I just wanted you to make sure that you see it so you know what we're going to be working with over here. Now, I'd like to give you an overview of our approach to building an individualized and periodized fight plan. Now, what we're looking at here, it's an example of a completed fight plan, and I'll just walk you through what we're going to focus on in step 1. So the first thing we do is we match up your intended fight date with the calendar dates. And you don't have to know, as I said, exactly when you're fighting. A rough ballpark is really all we need just to get going. Now, after this, the first step that I'll take you through involves scheduling the big training phases of your fight plan. And you can see these phases listed across the fight plan here. They should look familiar, actually, because we covered them in the lecture on periodization. Now, the first thing that we'll schedule in this case is the transition, and that lasts around 3 weeks after your fight. Next, we schedule the taper, always. It always takes up to 2 weeks before your fight. Then we schedule your fight camp, which always takes up to 8 weeks before your taper. Now, in the longer plans, the next thing that you'll schedule is the general preparatory phase, which should take up somewhere around half of the remaining time. Now, as you know, this phase doesn't take place in the shorter plans because the shorter plans assume that a fighter is more advanced and has a solid base of fitness. So the last phase to schedule, in that case, it's the fight-specific preparatory phase, which simply takes up the remaining time. So after we've scheduled the big training phases, we'll aim to forecast training volume and training intensity across your whole fight plan. Now, these are the two most important factors that we will plan on manipulating across the entire fight plan because they largely determine how you adapt to training. So here on the vertical axis, you'll see the percentages ranging from 0 all the way up to 100%, and across the top, you'll see the big training phases, including the general prep phase, of course. In the longer plans, again, this is omitted. In the shorter plans, you always have the fight-specific phase and the fight camp and the taper and the transition. So in this figure, you're going to see two lines. Now, the red one represents training intensity and the blue one represents training volume. I'm going to go into a lot more detail about why these curves are shaped the way they are in step 2, but for now, I just want to show you roughly how these lines are plotted across the whole fight plan. Okay, so here you can see our example fight plan, and I just wanted to point out what we'll be doing again in step 2 here. So again, in the longer plans where there's a general preparatory phase, intensity starts low and builds slowly across the plan. Now, training volume, it also starts low, but it builds higher and higher such that by the end of this phase, it's somewhere in the region of 100%. Now, in the longer fight plans, the fight-specific phase training volume decreases gradually and training intensity increases gradually, and they cross over at about the midway point in that phase. But in the shorter plans, training volume and training intensity rise pretty quickly, but training volume drops towards the end of this phase because even well-trained athletes can't tolerate high intensities and high volumes for a very long time. It'll lead to overtraining. So training intensity continues to build through the fight camp, but what you'll notice is training volume continues to drop. Now, you also may notice a little bump in training volume at the beginning of the fight camp. This is purposefully designed to bring about a positive adaptation that presents itself ideally for your fight. Now, when we get to the taper, training intensity remains very high, around 100%, but training volume drops a lot. What this does is it encourages a lot of the fatigue from all your previous training to dissipate ultimately before your fight, and hopefully this will bring about a peak in your fight performance. Now, some people call this whole process peaking an athlete. There's nothing mystical or mysterious about this, and I'll teach you exactly how to do it. It's very useful. Now, after your fight, both training volume and intensity will drop drastically, but they build slowly as you transition to your next fight plan. This is why it's called the transition. So there you have it. That's what we'll be covering in step 2. So after we forecast the training volume and intensity, we need to dig deeper by planning our training subphases and our training weeks. So in step 3 of this whole interactive workshop, we're going to need to introduce you to some key concepts, including training difficulty. We'll also introduce you to something called load planning, and we'll also talk about different types of subphases and training weeks. So for example, I'll show you how to schedule the transition, which should last 3 to 6 weeks. I'll show you how to plan your taper, which includes 2 peaking week subphases. I will show you how to plan the fight camp over 8 weeks using a combination of shock and developmental subphases. Again, I'm going to review these concepts later on in that workshop, so you don't need to know what they are right now, although we did cover them in the periodization lecture. We're also going to talk about the fight-specific preparatory phase using a combination of developmental and shock subphases. And of course, we'll schedule a general preparatory phase in the longer plans using a combination of developmental and shock subphases as well. So in step 4, I'll show you how to program training sessions across the whole fight plan. I'll tell you essentially which workouts go where. Now, if you recall from the Science of MMA course, I taught you how to manipulate factors like work-to-rest ratio to target different energy systems and ultimately build unstoppable endurance, and I shared a whole bunch of endurance workouts with you as well. I also, in that course, taught you how to manipulate things like load and repetitions to develop muscular endurance and hypertrophy and strength and power. And again, I gave you a whole bunch of workouts. In step 4, I'll show you how to place those workouts into your training plan to develop peak performance. So our general approach to doing this is shown here. Now, at the base of this pyramid, what you'll see is that we focus on developing the aerobic energy systems alongside muscular endurance. And this foundational work occurs mostly in the general preparatory phase, which is also found in the longer plans. Again, it's not found in the shorter plans because we assume fighters competing in just a few months have adequately developed endurance and fitness overall. But we do focus on these goals in the transition, so you can get back to focusing on those if you're in a shorter plan. You just need to have a longer transition. Now, after this, we shift our focus to aerobic glycolysis alongside muscular hypertrophy. And this shift happens towards the end of the general preparatory phase in the longer plans and at the beginning of the fight-specific preparatory phase. Now, as we ascend the pyramid and move through the fight-specific phase, we start to focus on anaerobic glycolytic energy systems as well as the development of muscular strength and power. And as we move into the fight camp and the taper, high-intensity efforts focus on the ATP-PCR system, which even though that's an anaerobic energy system, you can still target the aerobic energy systems as we talked about. But also, because MMA requires a combination of muscular endurance and strength and power, we focus on all those in the fight camp and taper as well. So again, an example from our fight plan. Now, in the longer plans featuring a general prep phase, we'd focus more on aerobic oxidation in the early and mid phase and aerobic glycolysis in the late phase, and also muscular endurance in the early to mid phase and muscular hypertrophy in the mid to late phase. But in the shorter plans, in the fight-specific phase, we'd focus on aerobic glycolysis, early to mid phase, and anaerobic glycolysis in the late phase, and buffering in the fight simulation throughout the fight-specific phase. And we focus on muscular hypertrophy and strength in the early to mid phase and power in the mid to late phase. In the fight camp and taper, we focus on ATP PCR system and buffering workouts and also the fight simulation, all alongside muscular endurance and strength and power. And our real focus, really towards the end of the fight camp and through the taper, is on maintaining these factors for your fight. Now, because our goal in step 4 is to help you program training sessions, I'll show you how to plan and write out individual training sessions using our template here. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail right now, but we'll get really specific in how to fill these out later and how to choose your individual workouts. So here, for example, you're looking at an example of an AM training session from the fight-specific phase, and it features a developmental sub-phase in the 10th training week, which happened to fall on a Thursday. The intended training intensity here is very high, and the training objectives, they're to develop anaerobic endurance and also with a focus on the ATP PCR system and muscle buffering. And here you can see that there's space for the warm-up and the main body and the cool down. They're all written out. So that's it. That's all I wanted to cover in this first session. So now you should have a good idea of the worksheets. You should print those out, make sure that you know what you're going to be working with. And again, I recommend printing everything out and working with pencil and paper. And I hope that you also have a good understanding of the 4 steps that we're going to implement together as we go through this large workshop to create your own individualized plan for peak performance. And that includes the first step, which we're going to cover in the next session, scheduling training phases. And then in the next one after that, we're going to forecast training volume and intensity. We're going to move on to plan training subphases and training weeks. And then we're going to finish off putting everything together in that last session by programming the training sessions. So that's it. Let's leave it there for now, and I look forward to working with you to get this ball rolling in the next session. So until then, take care.